after getting diagnosed with all those health conditions, at one specific doctor's appointment, Jordan and I were sitting in there, and the doctor looked at us and said, Cassidy, you're going to die young. And I was like, oh my gosh, so something has to change. Within like 3 or 4 days, I felt better than I ever had my entire life. I came back completely clean and had none of the diseases I had within 6 months.
Welcome back to For All the Saints podcast. I'm here with Jordan and Cassidy Gundersen today, who have a brilliant book about the word of wisdom, and it is fantastic. I would really recommend it to anyone, especially those who might be thinking, oh, I'd actually like to take more attention or apply that more into my life this year, because it is still New Year. But I wonder first, Jordan and Cassidy, if you don't mind, and for those who don't know about the book and everything like that, if you could give us sort of a background on both of your health issues in the past, because you've got quite an intense history with that, and then also how you both met.
Yeah. Go ahead, baby.
Well, I think for the both of us, health was not really something on our radar. We never really cared about our health, and I think that's kind of how it is for most people when they're young. But we met at BYU. We had actually both just changed our majors from other things into the political science program at BYU. And we went on a field trip up to the Utah State Capitol, and we sat next to each other on the bus, and we just started talking. And it was like about an hour-long bus ride up to the Capitol, and we just got talking about all kinds of things, and we just really clicked. And so we got to the Capitol, and we kind of hung out, and then we were on our way back, and we got talking about more things. And I remember that Cassidy mentioned to me that she was a vegetarian, and that put a real damper on my spirits. I was like, oh, I want to see where this goes with this girl, but she said she's a vegetarian, and I just can't do that. And so I actually ended up not asking for her phone number because
And the best part is I was only vegetarian because when I was on my mission, I had a gross experience one time with a member cutting up raw meat right off the deer, like a dead deer on his kitchen table, and he cut it off and ate it. And it grossed me out. So I was just like, oh, I don't want to eat meat. So it was just for me, there was nothing behind it. I was so unhealthy, but I was like, oh, that was gross. And so I didn't eat meat for a little bit after that. So when we met, that was kind of where I was at. And pretty quickly, so he did ask for my number, and I was devastated. I was like, this whole time we had talked so good. I thought we had a connection. That's so crazy.
And she wasn't used to that too, by the way. She was Miss Idaho. She was on American Idol. She was used to people just fawning over her. And
Wait, I read that you were were you actually on American Idol?
I was, yes. It was before my mission, 2012 was a year ago. So, so I was a professional performer. I was a singer. I had performed across the United States, and done a number of big things. And then I left on my mission, in the middle of my year, actually, of being Miss Idaho. I left on my mission. And then in the middle of filming American Idol, actually, I left that season to go on my mission. So, it was, it was cool. It was fun. It was a different life now. Now that I'm a homeschooling mom, it was that was forever ago. But it was, I was used to everyone kind of fawning over me. So when he didn't, I was like, what? But we happened to connect a couple weeks later, and this time Jordan got my number, and we went on a date.
I repented because right after I didn't ask for her number, I was going, what did I just do? Why did I let that little thing be such a sticking point? And I was kicking myself, but as God would have it, our paths crossed again, and I asked for a phone number, and then we went out, and then we actually weren't really interested in each other. But then we just kept talking, and we were friends, and then it just really continued to click
pretty quickly.
Yeah,
because we just went on one date, and it was just the date was actually really good. We really clicked on the date, but it just kind of got derailed a little bit by other people and circumstances on the date. And so we just kind of like stayed friends for a couple weeks, and then we hung out again one time after that. And then it was just like, we were married. We started dating. We started dating in April, and then we were married in August. So it was fast. But one of the interesting things that, so by this time, I have a decent amount of diseases, right? On my mission, I had been diagnosed with Crohn's disease. And before that, I had chronic kidney stones starting at age 12, 13. So every couple months, my whole life, I had kidney stones. I had these like migraines that would come and go. So endometriosis symptoms, PCOS symptoms. And so I have this, but I don't really have the full, I know that I have some problems, but that was about it. And so, I mean, even when we were dating, my mom pulled Jordan aside and was like, hey, are you ready to take this on? She's got a lot of problems. And I don't think either one of us knew the depth of the amount of problems that I had, right? Because I'm a strong-willed person. I'm a type A personality. So I was just powering through. And even people still, we talked to people who knew me and they're like, we had no idea you were this sick. I was like, I didn't either. So I mean, it kind of, we went into the marriage with that, and it was very quickly in the marriage, within months, that I was like, okay, I'm really, really sick. I am having a hard time getting out of bed now. I can't make it a full day at work. I'm getting these debilitating migraines. I'm getting sick all the time. And so I went in to go get a bunch more testing. I went to a bunch of doctors and kind of just like to really figure out what was going on. And all in all, I was diagnosed with 13 different health conditions. And so I mean, everywhere across the board. I had really high diabetic A1C levels. I had arthritis. I had tendonitis that they wanted to do surgery on. I had all these different things going on. And at one point, I was meeting with a gastroenterologist who was in charge of kind of my Crohn's disease, my IBD. And I said, can you just tell me what foods should I be eating or not eating? What foods should I be avoiding? And he was like, food's not going to affect it. Don't worry about it. And that to me was like the first time I was like, I literally know nothing about health. Like, I live on Dr. Pepper and Hostess snacks exclusively. Like, I'm pretty sure that food is going to affect my digestion. Like, I have a feeling that like a bowel disease will be affected by the food I'm eating.
And that's actually not hyperbole. That is literal. That's what she lived on. We have a picture of her with all this junk food that she got when she went on a trip with one of her friends. And that's all she ate was junk food, soda, and the works.
I would go weeks sometimes without drinking water.
Oh, wow. Okay.
I would go weeks because I was just drinking like soda.
Wow.
Yeah.
So considering that, like, where did the word of wisdom suddenly come into the play for you both? You have an excellent story in the book. I'm interested in like
that's a big part of our story. It didn't.
Yeah.
It was, I'd known about it. We both served missions, and so we taught people about the word of wisdom. But it just kind of was one of those things that's like this vague, like in the background. And so after getting diagnosed with all those health conditions, at one specific doctor's appointment, Jordan and I were sitting in there, and the doctor looked at us and said, Cassidy, you're going to die young. Like,
this doesn't look good.
Everything.
The trajectory is not going in a good place, and you're going to be on meds for the rest of your life, and maybe you can get a few more years out of that kind of a thing. And we were going, we're 23, 24.
And they advised us not to have kids. And I was like, oh my gosh, so something has to change. And so I was hungry. I wanted, we left there, and Jordan was like, so let's find the answer. Let's get you better somehow. Neither one of us knew what that looks like, but we knew there had to be a way for me to get better.
And so we had been doing some research. We had been changing things up in our diet, and things kind of got marginally better. And then we went to a little cafe in Springville, Utah. It's called Ginger's Garden Cafe. And it was created by Dr. John Christopher. It's kind of his family's little cafe down in there. And Cassidy was looking at some of the books that were on the shelves in that cafe. And one of them was a book by Dr. John Christopher called Just What is the Word of Wisdom? It's like a little pamphlet. It's really, really short. And so we opened it up and we started reading it. And he talked about things in there that were in the Word of Wisdom that we had never even thought of before. And our mind was just blown.
Yeah. No, like things we never considered what you should be eating. I was like, wait, what? Like that's in there, you know? And then also talking about, I mean, I knew that I never had alcohol. Well, I was served alcohol twice on my mission, so that's my claim. So I have had alcohol before, accidentally 2 times. I was like, this drink is so bad, sister. What's wrong with it? And we like look at the bottle and we're like, oh my gosh. Anyway, so I mean, besides those 2 accidents when people were trying to be kind to us and fed us alcohol, I'd never, I'd abstained from all the things, right? I had never had alcohol. I'd never had coffee. I'd never had tea or tobacco. And I was living the full Word of Wisdom. So it blew my mind when we start to read this book. And he was like, we should be eating every herb in the season thereof. And that's really important, that we should have wholesome herbs for our constitution, our nature, and our use. I was just like, I've never thought of that. And then he has this whole section, and this is what really blew our minds, what just like stopped me in my track, because through the dietary changes we started to make, we kind of went the route of the keto diet, the paleo keto diet. And it kind of made sense to me. All the books I was reading was very popular. Every article, all the influencers were talking about this. So it seemed like the right thing to do. And so we went keto. So we were having massive amounts of grass-fed meat and dairy for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And so I was eating a lot of meat and vegetables, for the first time in my life. So I was eating significantly healthier than Hostess snacks. But when we read this book for the first time, we get verses 12 and 13 that come into play in the Word of Wisdom. And all of a sudden I was like, wait, what? We shouldn't be eating meat. It's to be used sparingly. And they define sparingly in the next verse, used only in times of winter, cold, or famine. And it kind of, then he had this huge long expose in there about why we shouldn't be eating meat all the time and why it should be a very small part of our diet, if at all. And I was mind blown.
And interestingly enough, Cassidy had enrolled in a PhD program around this same time, and it was for health and nutrition. And her school was actually teaching the very same things from a different perspective. And so we've got 2 different sources, kind of the scientific, academic side, but then also this religious side. And I was kind of feeling all this weight and pressure because Cassidy said, hey, this is everything we have here. This is everything that we've learned. Would you ever not eat meat? And I was like, never in a million years. And that went right back to the first time that we met. That was a sweet spot for me. But then Cassidy said, you know what? What if we try it out for 2 weeks? 2 weeks, no eating meat. We'll just try it out for a small trial and see how we feel. And I said, okay, I'll try it out for 2 weeks just to support you. But, when I'm at work and when I'm alone, I'm going to do what I want. But when I'm home, I will support you. And so we did it for 2 weeks. And we like to say that we're still on our 2-week trial. Because really, within just a few months, all of those issues that Cassidy had in her blood work were completely gone.
So literally within days of doing a plant-based diet, going without the meat and dairy, which was a central part of my diet my entire life, within like 3 or 4 days, I felt better than I ever had my entire life. And it was all of a sudden like energy, and these problems just started going away immediately. And so we were just like, wow, like we can't stop this. We feel so amazing. And then within 6 months, like you said, my blood work was completely clear. I came back completely clean and had none of the diseases I had within 6 months. And so we had this personal testimony now of, okay, this works. This isn't just, I decided to give it a try because that was a different interpretation of the Word of Wisdom than I'd ever heard. I'd tried the other side of it. I'd been doing that for years and my health was suffering still. But all of a sudden I was willing to give this a shot and my health improved drastically overnight. And so it became this kind of mission of ours to help people understand that God's way of eating is superior to man's. He knows more than we ever can, and his ways work.
I think that's a really important point, because there is so much information around today. For example, I do work myself for health podcasts that are quite popular in the world, and we work with some of the biggest, health influencers around the world. And when I'm listening, working on it, I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I don't know what's true, what's not true. I mean, for example, let's talk about the meat thing. Let's do that. Because we have diets today. Yeah, I'm ready. That we have diets today that are fully meat. I'm sure you've heard about the carnivore diet, and I move in some circles where that's quite big. It's quite adopted. So information I'm getting from there is like, oh, you never mind not eating meat. You should only be eating meat. Yeah. But what do you say to people who listen to that and hear that and think, well, if they're saying that, then what's the word of wisdom on about? Or if I am so, like you, Jordan, I'm so entrenched in having meat play a really big part of my diet. Are there other experiences in church history or your own experience how do you respond to people who have that attitude? Maybe a better question.
Well, for me, I mean, the biggest convincer for me was firsthand experience. I tried both. I didn't go all carnivore, but we went keto, which was pretty close to carnivore. I was only eating a couple things besides meat. And I did feel better on that. And so I acknowledge that and concede that. A lot of people do feel better on that than they did on the standard American. It is significantly better for you. It's dropping blood sugar in the short term. It's doing a lot of things really quickly that help a lot. And so I felt better on it. And so I understand why people feel that way, because I tried it and I did feel better than I ever felt before. What I didn't know is I was feeling this good and I could feel this good. I could feel way better. I had no idea. And it wasn't until I tried it and I was able to see the long-term benefits. And then for me, also, I really love the studies and statistics. If you read our book, you'll see that we have, it's very, very dense with a lot of references. And everything we do is that way. And so for me, I started digging through the studies and I found that every single peer-reviewed study showed that plant-based outperformed keto and carnivore long-term, like bar none. The second you go carnivore or keto or anything like that, your chance of dying goes up by 68%. It's astronomical. Like, the numbers and the data behind it are just not even comparable. Every single study shows long-term difficulties on a keto paleo diet. So for me, that was really convincing. But then you also have the spiritual aspect.
And that was kind of the big thing for me, was what does the word say? What do the scriptures say? I think about in Genesis, we often talk about the first commandment that God gave to Adam and Eve, which was to multiply and replenish the earth. But then we don't think about the next command that he gave to Adam and Eve, which was to eat the fruit and the vegetables. That was what he told them very first. He gave them direction to multiply and replenish, and then what to eat. And he didn't say anything about eating animals. And it's not actually until Noah, when they get off the ark, the ground is waterlogged, and God says, okay, now you can eat animals, animal flesh. But he gives a caveat. If you read in Genesis 9, the Joseph Smith translation says that, you can eat flesh, but the blood of every beast will I require at your hands. And flesh is only to be used to save your life. So that's really interesting. That kind of echoes with the word of wisdom in Doctrine and Covenants 89, that it says that they should be used sparingly. Another example for me that was really powerful is actually in the book of Daniel. The very first chapter of Daniel, these Jewish boys had been taken into Babylon, and they're in the king's hall. They're going to be trained up in the ways of Babylon to become these wise men. And the servants are instructed to, fatten up these boys,
give them the keto
give them
diet.
lots of meat and wine and cheese and things like that. And Daniel and his friends say, no, we're not going to partake of the king's meat. And so this servant is like, no, you can't do this because it's going to be my head if you don't do this. And they say, let's try it out for a little while. And then you compare us with these other kids and see which one is better. And after they do that trial, it says that the countenance of Daniel and his friends was much brighter. They were stronger, they were fatter, they were much more physically capable than these other people who were eating all the junk food, all the meat, all the wine, all the cheese, things like that.
And what Daniel and his friends would have been eating is pulse, which is a combination of grains, beans, vegetables, and possibly like dates or figs or something like that, and herbs. So it's just this plant-based concoction, this plant-based stew, basically, that they're eating exclusively, right? And at the end of 10 days, they look far better, and they look good enough that the king's servant changes everyone else's diet to be pulse, so that they can, be the same. And so that's another great scriptural example of how, it's kind of hidden all throughout. For me, one of the really interesting parts is it's not even in our book, it's in the appendix of our book. And it's one of the most intriguing parts that I think everyone should read. I got pulled away for like weeks and weeks studying about Jesus Christ in all of the texts we have from Pliny the Elder, from Philo, from, any Clementine homilies, any of those original documents we have, the Dead Sea Scrolls, some of the Essene texts. I started reading everything I could about the time, and every single original source we have says that Jesus Christ and his apostles refused to partake of the Paschal lamb, and that they ate plant-based their entire life, refusing meat and refusing wine. Now, different than grape juice, right? When we talk about that in the book, there's a difference between naturally fermented grape juice, which they just had to keep throughout the year, and they would dilute with water, and then the wine that was meant to be intoxicating. And they from the time they were born, in fact, according to the Essene Gospel of the Peace, they say that when the angel appeared to Mary, he told Mary from that time on to not partake of any meat or any wine ever again, because her house would be a vessel for the Son of God. And so even she's told not to do that. And then every contemporary historical and scriptural account, the Syriac Aramaic text of the Gospels, everything is saying that Jesus Christ is telling them not to partake of meat, including the Paschal lamb, and that they, historically only ate water and vegetables or bread or whatever they had available plant-wise. And so we start to look not only scripturally, but then historically, it looks like these same principles are holding up throughout time. And so it's no wonder that now here in the 1800s, we have this temperance movement that takes over the United States. We get the Seventh-day Adventists, we get the Mormons, we get all these people now, again, living the same principles that we have seen from Adam to Noah to Daniel to Jesus, right? It's throughout everything that God's ways are different than the world's ways. It doesn't always make sense. In this case, I think it does make sense, though. The studies seem to support it. The data behind it is phenomenal. But God's ways are different than the world's ways. And so this isn't very popular. It's not, I mean, it is, but also it's not, right? You get a vegan movement that's very popular, which is also not God's way, I believe, and is also not healthy. But you get this kind of different eat God's food, this kind of plant-based movement that's much, much smaller. And when we do it, there's tremendous blessings. And those are echoed perfectly, I think, in the very end of the Word of Wisdom, because these blessings are seen pretty immediately for people who even try it out, even for us on a 2-week stint. But it's very obvious, and the blessings are there.
Yeah, well, let's go through those blessings. I have got the Word of Wisdom open in my scriptures here, so I'm not looking down at my phone or anything. But it says, and all saints who remember to keep and do these sayings, I should say this is in Doctrine and Covenants, section 89, for anyone who doesn't know. And all saints who remember to keep and do these sayings, walking in obedience to the commandments, shall receive health in their navel and marrow to their bones, and shall find wisdom and great treasures of knowledge, even hidden treasures, and shall run and not be weary, and shall walk and not faint. And I, the Lord, give unto them a promise, that the destroying angels shall pass by them, as the children of Israel, and not slay them. Amen. And I wonder if you can share, perhaps, if you have any personal experiences of these blessings, or if you know any from church history, for example. I know that, in fact, in your book, you talk about the miracle of Horns Mill, the miracle at Horns Mill, and I wonder if you could share with us that, as well as a bit more about those blessings.
Yeah, absolutely. I think our greatest knowledge is with our own experience. Experience, in my opinion, is the greatest teacher. And when we first changed our dietary patterns to be more in line with the word of wisdom, those spiritual messages, I think, came more clearly. It was almost like the channels between us and heaven were unclogged, and it seemed like we were more open and more receptive to divine inspiration. And I think a good example of that is when we were writing our book. Cassidy had been wanting to write a book on the word of wisdom for a long time, and I was kind of like, well, there's already a book on the word of wisdom that we read, and by Dr. John Christopher, and what more could we add? And then she just kept pushing at it, and then I said, okay, you know what? I'll help you write this book. And we started writing it in 2020. Yeah. And we had no idea. This was before the pandemic, things like that. We had no idea any of that was coming. But when we sat down to write it, it seemed like it was just coming. And it didn't feel like we were writing the book, honestly. And so it was just coming through us, essentially. And we've had so many people reach out to us and say, thank you so much for writing this. This has changed my life. I feel so good doing these things. And never in our wildest dreams could we have imagined this book having that kind of impact. And so for us, that was the biggest thing that came, was that increased spirituality.
Yeah, and we noticed that pretty immediately. I told Jordan I felt closer to God since we've been eating well than I did any other time in my entire life. Bar none. I feel God so closely and directly. And that's been the greatest thing. But quite literally, one of my favorite parts about the text in the Word of Wisdom is that he talks about some specific things in there. Health in the navel and marrow in the bones, which is really interesting because that was exactly what I needed when we started this journey. I had no health in the navel, which in our experience, the health in the navel means good digestion and good bowel movements, which we now know, years later, we have, Jordan has a master's degree in herbology and he's an iridologist. I have a PhD in nutrition. We now understand the important nature of good digestion and bowel movements. And it's really interesting that fiber is the key to that, and fiber is only found in plants. So we're starting to see this all connecting, right? That it talks about these grains and these plants we should be eating that contain fiber. That's the number one cause of bad digestion. 97% of people are fiber deficient in their diet. But when we get fiber in, we have good bowel movements, good health in our navel, and that increases our health significantly. The marrow in our bones has literally been studied to, and along with marrow in our bones, I think that's also kind of a metaphor for length of life. When I think of marrow in the bones, I actually think of telomeres. I don't know if you do. But telomeres are protective tips at the end of our DNA strands. And these protective tips determine our lifespan, basically. And you can look at them and see. Studies have found that eating a plant-based diet full of grains, beans, fruits, vegetables, nuts and seeds extends your telomeres, literally extending your lifespan in your DNA. And it's phenomenal. And when I think of that kind of adding to life, bringing life into the body, that marrow in the bones concept, which has also been proven scientifically that plants help to increase the marrow in the bones and stop the calcium pulling from the bones and that kind of thing. But that's the other thing, along with the run and not be weary and walk and not faint. I think about how I was barely surviving. I could barely make it through the days. I was sleeping like 16 hours a night just to try to survive before. And now I just have so much energy. And so I think about it, just the blessings that come with doing this are just so fast and so incredible that anyone can experience them and anyone can feel them. We've now had, since writing the book, we self-published not knowing what would happen. We had no idea that it would become a #1 bestseller, that people around the world and other religions would start reading it, and, that it would become so big. And so we've now had thousands of people, report, and we've heard from so many people about it. And what's been really cool is hearing the stories of people saying the same thing. Immediately, my spirituality increased. Immediately, God could talk to me. I was able to change things in my life I'd never been able to change, break bad habits, get out of situations. Just one lady read our book and started working with us, and she had not been able to have a job in over 35 years because she'd been so sick. She was on so many meds. She wanted to, had older kids. She really wanted to do something. And her dream was to help out with the BYU marching band, but she had she couldn't get out of bed. And within a couple of months, when she started working with us, she said she had so much energy. She got her first job and she applied. She works at the BYU marching band now, and she's so excited. But it was so cool to listen to her. And she just cried, telling me that it's all she'd ever wanted was to do something and to help. And she finally got to do it. And she's doing something she loves. And that never would have happened, without the word of wisdom, without making these changes in her life. And so the changes they're everywhere. Spiritually, I think, is the biggest one, especially for us. And that's what I hear from other people too. But then also these physical changes so quickly.
Right. I mean, again, it doesn't surprise me about the book because it is a really good book and it's very readable too. And what I appreciate is there are so many quotes from church leaders in the past that I had never heard of before that I thought, wow, that's really insightful. I had no idea they said that, particularly with, things like meat and animals. There's a lot of, I think you went to extra length to reference that because there is quite a
controversial part. People can get behind not having wine and coffee, but it's the most controversial.
In fact, this is a question that my wife told me I needed to ask, was because she often thinks, she says, I see people going around drinking Dr. Pepper and Coke and stuff. And when she smells the smell of coffee, she's like, I wish I could have that. And she told me I needed to ask about coffee and tea and why that is involved when perhaps other things aren't explicitly mentioned, that people, with going to McDonald's all the time and things like that.
Yeah.
What we often like to do when we get into these kind of texts, whether it's Doctrine and Covenants, the Book of Mormon, the Bible, any kind of older text, we like to go back to what the words meant at the time to try and understand what was trying to be conveyed. And what's interesting about the word hot in reference to hot drinks is there's many definitions in the 1800s. It could mean temperature hot, but there's also another definition meaning hot as in stimulating. So any kind of stimulating drink. That could be one interpretation, that any kind of drink that's going to stimulate your body in an unnatural way is going to do some harm. And so therefore we should avoid those kinds of things. So things like energy drinks, in my opinion, those are way more stimulating than coffee and tea, especially today. And I think that kind of goes into the conspiring men at the very beginning of the Word of Wisdom. It says that I give you these things because of the plans that will exist in the hearts of conspiring men. I think things like energy drinks and the overloaded sugary sodas, those are all things that are really stimulating, and they wear down the body. And so I think that's the reason why there's that admonition to avoid those kind of hot drinks. At the time, coffee and tea were really the only things that were those kind of stimulating drinks.
And one of the things that's been interesting for us is throughout the years, God has changed our hearts so much, and we've learned so much about grace. I feel like since we wrote the book, we've changed a lot in that regard. And we'll write another book sometime soon. I think sometimes
Please do.
Legalist in our view. But one of the things that I think we've really come to understand and see is that God is calling different people to different things. There's some people who may not be ready or want to give up meat or stimulating drinks or really anything for that matter. And there's other people who are hungry looking for more. And so God is calling us each individually to get better where we're at.
Line upon line.
And to do what we're prepared to do at that time. For some people, it makes sense. And if I could admonish anyone from my perspective as a PhD in nutrition, stay away from any of those, sodas, all of those drinks. Even a lot of the juices you find in the grocery store are just junk, right? It's not even real juice. All of these things will never add to your health. They don't even add to your long-term energy. They crash you in the day, and so all of these things, including the teas, the black teas and the coffees, have health implications, short-term and long-term. We've worked with so many people who have PCOS or hormone problems, who won't get off, who have the caffeine. We're having a cup of even organic, good quality coffee every morning, and it's disrupting their hormones. So we know that there's serious problems associated with all of these drinks. And that's not the question. We all kind of know that. Nobody's drinking a Monster Energy drink thinking, I think this is good for me, right? Like, this has good protein. But so we naturally know that. But at the same time, we may not be ready to give it up. If God's calling somebody, if you feel convicted by it, please give it up. It definitely fits in that category. It's going to affect your spirit and your mind every single time you partake. And so rather than, I think it's easy for us to look around and judge what other people are doing or aren't doing. People, who chug Monster Energy drinks are allowed in the temple, and maybe somebody else who has coffee isn't. And sometimes that can feel unfair. I don't think any of that is for us to judge or look at. I think for us, it's to look at our own heart and what is God calling us to do. For Jordan and I, we eat way different than anybody else. We don't require anybody else to eat the way that we do, right? We eat very, very different. Our kids have never had sugar before. Our kids have never had processed food before. And that's not where everyone else is. That's not what God's calling everyone else to do. But that's what he's calling us to do. And so I think sometimes part of it is doing the best we can to be in tune with the Spirit, to know what we should do, where we should be called. And then we can control that. We can control us and our family, right? We can choose to not partake of the Dr. Pepper or whatever, but it can't control what somebody else is doing.
I heard a great quote this week that sort of, that reminds me of, which is, consistency looks at first to be a lack of consistency. And I think that's a key with what you're talking about. If you ask me to go vegetarian right now, I couldn't do it because I'd slip up. But as we keep doing that can happen. And talking about the sugary drinks, I was so interested in the quotes that you mentioned in the book from Heber J. Grant and Spencer W. Kimball about them. And obviously they said in there that, this isn't a commandment. This is a personal thing. Please avoid those. And I think that's very wise. But I wanted to go back to Jordan. You mentioned verse 4, and I'll read that. Behold, verily, thus saith the Lord unto you, in consequence of evils and designs which do and will exist in the hearts of conspiring men in the last days, I have warned you and forewarn you by giving unto you this word of wisdom by revelation. I'd love to get your further explanation of that and interpretation, because there's so much in there, and that could be so much as well.
There's one example we give in the book, which is very, very interesting to me. So at this time and up until the 1900s, you have doctors prescribing smoking, right? Smoking is the big thing. And everyone's smoking. And it's, I mean, the commercials are like, doctor recommended Candles brand. Like it's pushed in everyone's face, right? And the temperance movement, and you get this word of wisdom, and we have all these people who now already have these convictions to not partake in tobacco. So they're not giving in to this smoking craze that's going on. We now know in retrospect that it had killed millions of people. That this smoking and then prescribing smoking had killed millions of people. And it took years and years. It took over 50 years and 7,000 studies for them to finally put a Surgeon General's warning on the box and to stop prescribing it, right? It still exists. It's still there for everyone. But even just that alone, the millions of deaths and over 7,000 studies, it took them, that long to even put a warning on it and to stop prescribing it. And yet people who listened to this admonition were protected from that. People who, were warned about the conspiring men and listened to these things didn't have to worry about it. They weren't a part of those numbers. They didn't have to deal not only with the extremely high cancer rates, the death rates, but all the other diseases that were associated with smoking. And so that's one of my favorite examples because people were protected literally. And we have firm numbers and data to back that up to see how people were protected by listening to these admonitions. But we also talk about in there a really interesting scriptural principle of pharmakia.
And just to go and focus on the word conspiring, I think we need to go back to the Book of Mormon to really understand what that means. Today we hear about conspiracy theories and all this nonsense online, but the word conspiracy or conspiring men is just a group of people who get together in secret to do something or create some kind of plan to get power or gain money. That's what the Book of Mormon talks about. And so really we think about all these mega corporations, all these food companies who have, they buy up all these smaller companies and then they pump their products full of junk to addict you. So that you buy more and so that you spend more money on their products. And Cassidy brought up pharmakia. That's a word that goes back to the book of Revelation. It talks about this word pharmakia.
The whole world would be deceived.
The whole world would be deceived by this pharmakia, and that's the root word for pharmacy, pharmaceuticals. And we look at the pharmaceutical industry. And, the rise of the pharmaceutical industry, they initially started off just giving people oil. That was
like crude oil, not like olive oil, like crude gasoline.
It was the Rockefellers who had this extra oil and they said, what do we do with it? Well, let's package it as a medication and give it to people. And that's kind of how the modern pharmaceutical industry got started. Because they had all this extra oil they couldn't do anything with, and they needed to get rid of it, so they sold it as medicine.
That's the story of health industry. That's
So
like whey protein started the same way. All these different companies started, not necessarily with our best interest in mind, and for those that were willing to listen to those admonitions years before a lot of these things even started, people were safe. People have lived this. There's people, since we wrote this book, we've had people reach out to us who said, I've thought this my whole life. God revealed this to me when I was young. I've been living this for 50 years or whatever. I never get sick. I'm the only one living in my family. All my siblings are dead. I'm in my 90s, happy as can be. It's so incredible to hear these stories that people that caught on to this earlier, way earlier than us, have been living this, and they've been protected from the conspiring men. From all these different angles in the world.
And I think the key is actually found in verse 10. The key to all of us, the key to avoiding these conspiring men, these corporations who want to take advantage of you and just get your money and addict you and things like that. It says in verse 10, I say unto you all wholesome herbs God hath ordained for the constitution, nature, and use of man. And the key word is wholesome there. we want to use foods in their whole state. So fruits and vegetables in their whole state. If you go to the grocery store and you buy, a packaged thing that's like, I don't know, some pineapple fruit bar or something, it might have some pineapple flavoring in it. It might have a bunch of other additives, but that's not a wholesome food. It's not with all the parts of that pineapple. Maybe it has a little bit of pineapple extract in it or something like that. But we want to focus on those wholesome foods. So whole fruits, whole vegetables, whole grains, things like that. And especially when it's in season. If you know anything about gardening or about produce, you'll know that when a fruit is ripe, that's when the most nutrients are present, right as it's actually falling off the tree or falling off the plant. That is the peak nutrient point. So as much as we can, we want to get our produce when it's in season, when it's ripe.
That's fascinating. Interestingly, I did my university dissertation on farming and food produce. Not that I'm an expert on it, but I just it was for a marketing dissertation, and so I thought it would be interesting to research a better intermediary between local farms and local communities, where local farms used to be the center of the English community as well as the church. It was sort of those two.
Yeah.
Then it spread out from there, and that's stopped now with sort of, big global food corporations and stuff and supermarkets. And so I was interviewing farmers to discuss this and to discuss a better way. And that's one thing that they mentioned, was that these days, because of the manufacturing process, we are so detached from our food that we don't really know as much like why we would eat in season, what's the importance of that, or people would be demanding that this guy as a farmer grow tomatoes when it was impossible to grow a tomato naturally in that season and stuff, and say, you have no idea. But and that seems to be a trending topic too at the moment, is sort of there's a lot of revealing going on about the mischievousness of some of these corporations and discovering ingredients on things, saying, what actually is that? I know I even went, I've used just normal store-bought shampoo all my life, and this is kind of a joke. I'm not undermining anything here by sort of giving low-quality comments, but just to sort of illustrate how it's trending at the moment is, I spoke to a guy in Istanbul who was 80 and had a wonderful head of hair, and no one sees it because I'm tall and I face the front, but I'm sort of slightly losing my hair at the back. And I said, how do you have such voluminous hair at such an old age? And he said, pure olive oil, the ancient way, and natural olive oil. And so while I was in Turkey, I bought some olive oil, and I've been washing my hair with that. So we're discovering all these random things. But again, that was more of a lighthearted comment rather than a serious thing for people to take away. But
I think a lot of people are there. I think a lot of people are. I think God is doing a work right now. It's very clear if you look around that God's doing work right now. He's strengthening his forces. He's waking people up. As evil grows in the world, God's power is moving forward, and he's bringing a lot of people back to their roots. You see a lot of these movements right now going on, kind of waking up what is in what we're doing, what is in what we're eating, what is, what are we spending our time doing? Everyone's kind of waking up to the important things. And the important things are pretty simple, right? And so olive oil, right? These things can be really simple and fairly cheap to live God's way. It's not very expensive. And it's simple. It's going back to our roots.
Yeah. And people listening to this thinking, I feel inspired and want to change my ways. I want to live my life more in line with the word of wisdom and be a beneficiary of those promises and the blessings. Where would you advise them to begin? And what's sort of the ideal word of wisdom diet options?
That's a great question. Probably reading our book is the most helpful thing initially. Just to get a full big picture, because we've talked about snippets here, but I mean, we have hundreds of
It's very thorough.
Studies and references in there that help to get a better picture.
And you can read it for free. Anybody can go onto our book website and download a free PDF copy. And so you can start reading that today. It's wordofwisdombook.com, and you can just get our free PDF book and start reading. I think that's really the best place to start to kind of view this in a different light than maybe you have before, because it is a big paradigm shift.
We also have a 30-day challenge on our website for people to start for 30 days with basic principles, studying, and to kind of get the hang of it. It was really quick for us. It was 2 weeks and we were on board and we were totally sold. But this 30-day challenge kind of gives you one activity to do every day. Write your thoughts, write a contract with yourself. And it gives you kind of something to do every day to study and dig in deeper. So that's an option for people as well. But when we're starting to eat this way, we tell people to start by eating exactly what's in the scriptures: fruits, vegetables, whole grains, nuts, and seeds. Start there. One of the easy things you can do is start with things you already like. You already like oatmeal. That's easy, right? Let's, switch a few ingredients in that oatmeal and now it's totally compliant. And so start with oatmeal, start with the spaghetti, things you already like that you can just switch a little bit, that you can just transfer a couple of ingredients to make healthy. And just try it out. It's one of those things that's trial and error, and you can give it a shot. But yeah, read the principles, read what he's calling you to do, and go to the store and buy lots of fruits and vegetables.
I'm thinking as well, Jordan, you mentioned you went through this huge change when you adapted to not eating meat, and that at first it was very scary. For those people who start and struggle to sort of maintain motivation, what tips might you give for making this a sustainable long-term life change, rather than just the usual 6 month diet detox?
Well, that's a great question. The biggest thing for me is to realize that you don't have to eat salad for every meal. That was a big thing for me. I was so worried that I was just gonna have to eat salad all the time, and I didn't really like salad, but salad is actually really good. I enjoy it now, but realizing that you don't just have to eat a few vegetables, because that's not going to fill you up. There are a lot of things that you'll want to look at, specifically the calories. When you first start out, you're going to want to track your calories, how many calories you're eating, because you're going to quickly realize that you actually have to eat more volume of food, because fruits, vegetables, whole grains, nuts, and seeds are lower in calories than something like a steak or some chicken and things like that. And so you'll actually be able to lose weight really quickly when you eat this way, if people need to lose weight, if that's something they want to do. But you will want to make sure that you're eating enough to get full. I also think that you also have to make it a moral thing for yourself if you do want to make this kind of change, because studies have indicated that it's actually harder to change your diet than it is to change your religion.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So if you want to actually make the change stick, it has to come from a place of morality or something like that. And I think that's why our book did so well with a lot of people, because it opened them up to a new way of thinking about things in terms of a religious, moral perspective. And so I think that's why for a lot of people, this is able to stick for them.
There's a couple other things that I have to say. Another thing that we did is we involved God. It was really hard in the beginning for me. I was a food addict, and I was very addicted to a lot of the foods that we were eating in the standard American diet. And so it was really emotional and hard for me. So I involved God a lot. I prayed a lot for his help to make the changes and to do what I felt like he was calling me to do. And he gave me that help. The other thing too is I also think sometimes we try to jump all in, which might be some people's personality. That's my personality. I was like, one day here and the next day I'm here. But a lot of people don't work that way. Sometimes we need incremental changes. And I give this example. So when I was on my mission for the first time, my companion made me a smoothie, and it had, I don't remember, like frozen berries or something in that. I thought it was the most disgusting thing on the planet. It was horrible, horrible, horrible. So I had like a half cup or a full cup of white sugar, and I blended it up again. And that was my first smoothie that I had. I'd never had a smoothie before that. Never. And that was my first smoothie that I'd had. I mean, I'd had Jamba Juice, but like that was my first homemade smoothie. And I just put a ton of white sugar in it because it was so gross. And then eventually I changed and I started putting honey in my smoothie instead. I kept having a smoothie, but I kept put honey in, which was better than, white sugar. And then eventually I added greens in too. And I added some greens in there. And so I had some greens and my honey and all this stuff. And then eventually I stopped doing honey. And so I had my greens and my fruit in there. And then eventually I started adding in things like ginger and turmeric and barley grass juice powder and alfalfa and spirulina, right? But if you would have handed me that smoothie with spirulina and barley grass juice and greens and, if you would have handed that to me in the beginning, I would have spit it out and hated it. I never would have. What helped me to get to that point was small incremental changes, right? I went from, I'm having my smoothie but with white sugar and then honey and then I'm going to add greens and now no honey, right? I had to slowly make those changes. And I think sometimes that's the answer for people to make sustainable changes, is to do small incremental changes in the right direction rather than jump all in at once. Know where you're going, know where your end goal is, but know that if you tried to drink that smoothie now, it would be horrible. And so for some people that's doable. For some people, they say that's not a big deal. I'll go there, let me just make the change. But other people, keep in mind that God is with us and he doesn't want us to run faster than we have strength. And we're running a marathon. We're not running a quick foot race. And so we've got to go slow and steady in the right direction. And so don't be afraid to make small changes, to do small things, knowing that this is the end goal. Maybe instead of, maybe dairy's harder for you or whatever, or, maybe certain kinds of meats or whatever's hardest for you. You go, I'm going to leave that one in for a while, but I'm going to start here. Let's start over here on this thing that's doable and move in the right direction.
That's a really great message. I was going to ask quickly, do you have dairy? Do you include that as sort of the meat element, all of that?
Yeah, we talk about that in the end of our book as well. Our family doesn't do dairy for a number of reasons. Those reasons actually started off primarily as being health reasons for our individual health and stuff like that. But overall, we did feel that it kind of fit in the same category as meat. Other people have kind of said the opposite, that they feel like it doesn't fit, that they feel good about not having meat, but they have dairy. For us, we feel significantly better without it, so we don't do it. But that's not something that I think people should feel called or compelled to do. Nobody's being asked to do that anywhere in this text or in our book even.
Yeah, I think that's a great message. And what you said before as well, it goes along with that whole don't be afraid to follow the Spirit. It's... Yeah. We'll get it wrong, and I guess many people have been getting the word of wisdom wrong for a long time, because when you actually read it and study it, it's like, oh, I didn't realize that. And also that message of not judging others or not being too harsh on yourself as well. I mean,
yeah,
goodness, on my mission, I knew nothing about nutrition, and I remember thinking I should get into smoothies. And so I got some mangoes and I was mixing it up with ice, and I thought, oh, this texture is terrible. So I bought this big jug of ice cream. I put the mango and I put loads of scoops of ice cream in there and mixed it up, and I thought, oh, that's a much better texture. Basically, just making... I was having a milkshake every morning of my mission for a few weeks. And I just thought, man, eventually I learned as I continued to grow and have that righteous desire to be healthier. But if my companion had judged me during that, it would have been a terrible time.
Right.
But my final question to you both is one that I think is really important, is because it seems like a very practical, temporal commandment or advice or whatever you would say it was. But how does the word of wisdom point us to Jesus Christ?
That's a great question. I think it goes back to what Paul says, know ye not that ye are the temple of God, and that our bodies are what can house the Spirit that will dwell in us. And if that temple is having some problems, if it's got a lot of baggage, so to speak, because of our dietary habits, and the substances that we're putting in our bodies, if they're harmful, that's going to affect our mind, but it's also going to affect our spirit as well. And if we have those things going on, we're not going to be able to receive the messages that Christ wants us to hear. And that could be as small as, not receiving a prompting or listening to a prompting to help someone else, or it could be, much bigger than that. It all depends on the person and the situation, but I think each of us has an obligation to take care of our bodies that we have been given, that are literally a gift from God. When we leave this place and we're done on this earth, this is the only thing that we get to take with us after we're resurrected. This is the only thing that we're going to have. Of course, we're going to have all our relationships and things, but this is the only physical thing that we get to keep. This is ours. This is a gift from God, and I think we should treat it as such.
Yeah. Alongside that, when I was sick, when I wasn't following these principles and I was sick, I had no energy or ability to do any work for the Lord. He could barely work through me. I look at the end part of my mission. When I was so sick, I could barely get out of bed a lot of mornings. I look at, when we were young marrieds, I had no energy to give to God. I had nothing to offer him because I was barely surviving. And since I've been better, I have been able to give God and his children so much of my time, my energy that I never had before. And so living these principles allowed me to draw closer to him and to do his work that I physically was unable to do before. And I think that's the case for a lot of people, is that we would love to serve God, but we can't. We have physical limitations. And following his principles brings miraculous, like not just natural, but also miraculous healings, because he's God and could do anything. And when we have those healings and we have those blessings, our lives change in every way, and we can do his work. We can open our minds and hearts to him to be useful. And so I fully agree with everything that Jordan said, and we've talked about this ad nauseum for years, but I feel so good with God. And I also know that I have this confidence and faith, my increased faith, knowing that I have been taking care of this body that he gave me, and I can feel confident standing before him when I pray, when I talk to him, that I'm doing a good job to take care of myself. I don't have any guilt. I don't have any shame. I don't feel bad talking to God about this body that I have, because I know that I'm treating well, and I get his help with it and other things too. And so in every way, it's brought us closer to God.
Thank you both. That's really thought-provoking. It reminds me of Elder Klebengat's 2014 General Conference talk, Approaching the Throne of God with Confidence. And one of his tips there is take responsibility for your physical well-being and spiritual well-being. It's a great talk. You should read it. But thank you both so much for your time. And it's been great. I've learned so much and I feel inspired. The book is fantastic, and I would recommend again everyone to read it. And I didn't know you could read it for free, so I could have saved a few pennies, but but that's fine.
We want, but we do have it as a PDF for free.
Yes, I got it on Kindle, and I enjoyed reading it on my little Kindle device. And thank you both. Where should people go to keep up to date with what you're doing and find all these great resources?
Oh, well, so we have, our book is at wordofwisdombook.com, but we run our business. Our motto is faith, herbs, and food, and our business is healthsaves.org. And that's where we run all of our own stuff for personal questions, consultations, that kind of thing would be at healthsaves.org. But Word of Wisdom book is where you can find the free book.
Perfect. Thank you both so much.
Yeah,
thank you so much for having us.
Thanks for watching For All the Saints. This show needs your help to grow. Please like the video, comment your thoughts, subscribe to the channel, and share this with someone you think would enjoy it. Thank you.